This video is a compilation of many of my favorite RimWorld tips. I hope you find a few of these useful in your next playthrough. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this one. Doors are one of the strongest defensive objects in the game. Use them to even up the odds when you're outnumbered. You can position 3 pawns, animals, or mechs in front of a door and protect them from being attacked by more than one enemy at once, while all 3 can damage the enemy. The larger the number of enemies, the stronger this tactic becomes. This can be further improved by having multiple choke points near each other so that you can retreat from one to another and then to another. This is a great spot to use EMP grenades or throw a little fire on the ground for crowd control. Animals and mechs are particularly well suited for blocking doorways. While both are valid options, keep in mind animals are difficult to control in these situations, making mechs the superior of the 2 options. At its core, this next tip is a continuation of the choke point strategy. Make sure you connect all of your rooms to hallways or outdoor alleys. You always want to make sure that you have a safe path that leads to a choke point, and ideally from there to another choke point. This is where hallways and alleys really come in handy. This allows you to have cover and a line of sight break as you retreat from one choke point to another. Double thick walls are best used on the exterior of a base. I tend to keep my interior walls single thick. This may be obvious to most people, but I wanted to explain the reasoning behind it. When an enemy destroys the first layer, they'll randomly choose a new block to attack instead of attacking the next layer. If you're doing a no-kill box run, this is a surprisingly effective way to split up the enemy and keep them occupied while you pick off the highest risk targets first. You can see here how the raider destroys the first block, and then instead of continuing to the next adjacent block, they pick an entirely new block, wandering off to the other side of the base. The material you use to build and craft affects the stats significantly. Plasteel has the highest HP, followed by uranium, with both having 0% flammability. The downside of these 2 materials is the difficulty of sourcing. Of the stones, which is much easier to source, granite has the highest HP, consequently is usually the preferred stone for building. Sandstone, on the other hand, has the fastest build time and the lowest wealth value, making it still a pretty useful wall material. Marble is another one to consider since it has a base beauty of 1, making any walls that you build out of it naturally beautiful. The same is true for crafting. When you're making clothing or armor, it's best to check the material that you're building it out of. When you're crafting weapons, some materials are going to provide higher sharp damage or blunt damage, while when you're crafting armor or clothing, some of the materials are going to be providing better sharp protection or blunt protection, or in the case of Devil Strand, even better fire protection. So always check the stats on the material that you're building with before you build. Mini turrets can be built out of plasteel and uranium to be made non-flammable. These make surprisingly good tanks as long as they aren't targeted by too many enemies at once. If you're not opposed to a creative workaround, you can use the reconnect trick to turn off the turret when they're in danger, causing the enemies to wander off and attack something else. Just build a dead conduit nearby, press H to swap the connection between live and dead conduit. This is going to increase the strength of the mini turret significantly. A lot of players prefer to cook meals for their pawns, but in the early game, the nutrient paste dispenser can be invaluable. Paste only takes 60% of the resources compared to a simple meal, and more importantly, paste will never cause food poisoning. On top of these 2 things, no work is required to create meals, saving you time that can be directed toward progressing the colony. And as long as you invest a few resources into providing impressive rooms, the mood penalty that the pawns get from eating paste is going to be negligible. The heavy SMG is a fantastic base weapon for your pawns. It has one of the lowest base accuracy penalties in the game, making it particularly useful for those low shooting pawns. It doesn't have the peak damage of the assault rifle, but between that high base accuracy and a lower fall off at non-ideal ranges, this serves as a great basic gun for your colonists. Equip heavy SMGs on your average pawns, and then you can save all those better guns for your high skill shooters. This next tip goes back to the use of hallways. If you unroof the hallways, you can start to grow any crops you want inside the hallways. This keeps a food supply adjacent to where your pawns are living, keeps the grow zone safe. Occasionally raiders are going to stop to light fires in these hallway crops, but you should never lose more than 1 hallway worth at a time. You can set a grow zone to auto-harvest trees, berries, or even ambrosia. Set a grow zone underneath what you want to harvest, and then turn off sowing. Whenever the target reaches 100% growth, one of your pawns set to plant cutting will come by to harvest. This will continue on until the plant dies. Always remember that you can use a room for multiple things. Combine your recreation room, your dining room, and even your barracks into a single room. This will save you the trouble of trying to accumulate enough impressiveness to get the highest mood bonuses possible. Stack up all your impressiveness in just one room, and get a huge bonus for 3. Not only is this going to keep the mood of your pawns up, but it's also going to make your raids easier, since it's going to keep the overall wealth count down. Prisoners don't have to be stored in a prison. In fact, you can put them anywhere. Without a bed, they have an escape interval of never, meaning they will never attempt a prison break. If you store them in your barracks along with access to a nutrient paste dispenser, then they'll even feed themselves, without the need of one of your pawns to take up the time to bring them a meal. Now, I will admit this tip does border on a bit of a glitch or exploit, but I wanted to make sure to include it anyway, just to shine a light on it. You can use multiple research benches to increase research speed. This is particularly useful if you're playing tribal and dealing with the base research penalty. Every single pawn produces research points as long as they're working at a research table. The amount of points is produced based on their overall work speed and their intellectual skill. That means that 2 pawns with a 10 intellectual and the same work speed will produce double the research of just one of those pawns working alone. In fact, there's no limit to the number of pawns that you can have researching at once, as long as you can fit in more research benches. Use double doors for safer exterior transition, but make sure you always leave one space between the doors. Believe it or not, a pawn will move through faster when you leave a gap compared to 2 doors without a space. This really can make a massive difference when you're being chased by enemies. That small speed increase can make the difference between life and death. Caravan hitching spots can serve as a temporary animal storage, but it does have a few downsides. Animals will not reproduce or lay eggs while tied up to the hitching spot, but they will graze in the area immediately surrounding the hitching spot. Be careful because they will eventually eat all the grass, so this is best used as a short-term solution for storing animals. But it often does beat building an entire pen for animals that you don't intend to keep long-term. Drafted pawns will put out adjacent fires. This can be useful if you want to make sure fire doesn't spread past a particular point. This is also helpful for putting out fires outside the home zone, without having to either expand the home or continuously order the pawns to fight the fires. The trait Trigger Happy has effects beyond just firing guns. It is also useful when throwing grenades and casting sidecasts. If you combine this with Shooting Specialist from Ideology DLC, you can reduce the aiming time to 1%, causing a pretty spectacular result when it comes to throwing grenades, or for instant casting sidecasts. You've heard of always buy components, but more importantly, always buy Insanity Lances and Shock Lances. Shaman merchants will carry them with every caravan. Shock Lances are particularly valuable in the early game, as they can be used to down a pawn with no risk of killing them. Then you have the opportunity to steal their armor, capture them, or guarantee taking out a high-risk enemy. Keep in mind there is a small chance to cause brain scarring on the target, but this is usually minor and can be cured after the fact with a Healer Mech Serum or a Biosculptor. Both the Shock Lance and the Insanity Lance can also be used on mechs. This is particularly useful against termites or centipedes. The Shock Lance will disable a mech temporarily, but even after it does get up, it will be brain dead and wander around aimlessly. You can use the caravan system to fill a pawn's inventory with items to haul more efficiently. This is particularly useful if you want to haul from an unsafe location or if you're just trying to save on trips. Fill up the pawn's inventory using caravan, then order them to haul using the regular command. This way you'll be carrying much more per trip. Hidden power conduits never discharge, meaning they will never start fires. If you're willing to spend the extra steel, this can be incredibly valuable. I don't know about you, but I've had far too many runs end by a poorly timed discharge fire. Keep in mind that building even one normal conduit comes along with a chance of discharge fire. A pawn with 0% movement can never break. And there's one surefire way to make sure a pawn has 0% of movement. Admittedly, this is not the most tasteful tip that made the list, but certainly has come in handy on several occasions. I find this one particularly helpful when dealing with psychite addictions. On the topic of psychite addictions, don't be afraid of chems in the game. Yayo only has a 1% chance of addiction, Just to put that in another context, 99% of the time you won't get addicted. I still wouldn't let the pawns use it whenever they please, and make sure you watch out for those binges. When addiction does occur, there's always that last tip about 0% movement speed. But keep this in mind next time you're facing a really challenging battle. Give your pawns a dose of yayo or a shot of go juice just to give them a little more time to stay in the fight. Trauma Savant is a hidden buff giving plus 50% manipulation at the cost of social ability. This has a chance of triggering 10% of the time when damage occurs to the brain. This one can be a bit tricky to trigger, but when it does, it can really make a massive difference to your industry pawns. Some people have had luck using machine pistols against their own pawns. The idea being that the combination of high rate of fire and low damage gives a higher chance of damaging the brain without killing the pawn. Be careful with this one though. Damaging your own pawns can be pretty dangerous. No floors means no dirt to clean. Remove your floors and plant daylilies instead. Daylilies are a surprisingly effective way of raising impressiveness of the room without affecting your wealth. They won't grow because they won't have light, but they'll still provide impressiveness just at their base growth. This is a really strong early game tactic to save time, but not lose out on impressiveness. Pemmican's one of the most efficient foods that your pawns can eat, as they're always going to eat exactly enough to fill their bars and never more. Meals, on the other hand, provide 90% of a food bar, and your pawns are almost always eating a meal higher than 10% food, meaning that there's going to be overeating and food wastage. Admittedly, most of the time you're not going to notice the food wastage, but if you're playing on a map with low food supply, this really can make a big difference. If a prisoner's addicted to chems, you can release them, and then when they return to attack you again, they'll bring you free chems in their inventory. This is a particular favorite of those who like using Luciferium. You can force Luciferium on the prisoner, release them, and see them return later with a nice stock of Luciferium. If you have the Royalty DLC, any pawn with the Natural Meditation type, regardless of colony type, can meditate at the anima tree to grow anima grass. Every 20 grass at the tree allows for the linking ritual, giving +1 Psylink to any pawn with Natural Meditation type. This is incredibly powerful, given that there's no other upkeep to the anima tree other than growing the grass and performing the ritual. This is an easy way to get multiple level 6 Psylink characters. If you have the Ideology DLC, Human Primacy enables the Production Specialist role. This is one of my favorite parts of Ideology. I find the impact to be game-changing. Production Specialist adds +1 quality to everything the Specialist crafts or constructs. Put this into weapons and armor and you'll notice a massive difference in combat. Try it out with building beds, and you'll find that your pawns are going to sleep far less. If you have the Biotech DLC, children that grow up in a tribe can start meditation at the tree at 3 years old. This is a way to supercharge your anima grass growing power. What else are your children doing anyway? Have them grow grass. If you have the Anomaly DLC, well, let's not talk about that one. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this one, remember to subscribe, leave a thumbs up. I'll make sure to upload at least one new video a week, so keep an eye out for that going forward. See you on the next one.